Hello everyone, welcome to Worchester Street. I hope you enjoy your stay. A very special welcome to all my new subscribers. It's incredible to think that 3,000 of you have already booked your stay on Worchester Street by subscribing. I look forward to scaring you for a long time to come. A quick reminder to stay tuned after the story for a special announcement. That being said, let's get started. At the South Pole, the weather behaves differently from the way that we know it. During the summer months, the South Pole receives 24 hours of sunlight a day. Thousands of scientists and tourists come to visit and enjoy the weather and sights. But during the winter, there's nothing but darkness for months. The sun never rises, and storms make travel nearly impossible. You'd think that most would abandon the continent during this time. But you'd be wrong. Some few brave individuals brave the winter months to collect data or to maintain the facilities. Recently, the US base at the South Pole stopped responding to their radio. No one knew why, but it remained impassable until the winter was over. When explorers finally made it through the darkness, they found the base burnt down and destroyed. Their only clue? A small notebook found inside a freezer. This is what they read. Friday, July 7th, 2017. Henry sat at the end of the dining room table, shaking his fist to make his point. He just returned from an excursion to the nearby Norwegian research base. Apparently, it had been an eventful trip. So Roy and I walk up to his door all quiet, and we knock on it, Henry said, pounding on the table, and Jenkins just shrieks at us to go away from the other room. But we knock again, and he opens his door, then jumps on Roy. I turned away from him to take a sip from my soup. Henry always embellished his stories, but living on an Antarctic research base meant that you took all the entertainment you could get, even if it meant a few tall tales. It was early July, and that meant no one here had seen the sun for several months. Living so far from civilization was difficult, but harder still was the negative 50-degree temperatures outside. Still, I didn't mind it. Being an astronomer, I'd leapt at the opportunity to come to the station. Uninterrupted darkness meant you had a perfect view of the stars for several months. Henry continued with his story. Jenkins is biting and scratching, but I managed to pull him off Roy, and we used the rope to tie him up. He thrashed and screamed, but we kept him down. Henry was a beefy mechanic whose job was making sure our generators kept us alive through the winter. I didn't doubt he could have very easily held down some crazed Norwegian. Henry leaned forward, enjoying the attention from everyone sitting around the table. The craziest thing is that Jenkins was bleeding from his ears and nose. Isn't that something? Dr. Bobert, an older graying man, perked up from where he sat near Harry. Really? He said. He'd have to have suffered some serious trauma for that to happen. Henry shrugged. All I know is that by the time I left, he was still all tied up. They're hoping he calms down after a few days. If he stays like that all winter. Rachel nodded from where she sat next to me, her brown hair bobbing with emotion. Yeah, that would be bad, she said. Really though, Henry? I asked. Blood from his ears? I mean, come on. Henry rolled his eyes at me. Yes, James, blood from his ears and nose. You can call up the folks over at Ambold Station yourself if you don't believe me. I held up my hands in apology. I didn't mean to offend. He waved his hands dismissively. It's nothing. He turned his attention back to his own food. He turned his attention back to his food, and the conversation at the table slowly resumed. We all cleaned up after the meal, and I headed to my room. I had been living on the station for several months, and it was getting harder to maintain professionalism. I pulled out the small notebook I always carry around with me and made a note to keep better control of myself before heading to bed. Saturday, July 8th, 2017. I woke up early and moved my telescope to a new section of sky. I had been hoping to discover an exoplanet, and the data from this star cluster was looking very promising. After I set up the system to run for a few hours, I headed towards our comms room. Halfway there, I stopped in a hallway and pressed my face to the window, looking out at the flag that marked the geographic South Pole. Scott Station was located just a few dozen feet from the pole. During these winter months, our station was completely impassable by air, and by most forms of transportation on land. The only people who remained were scientists like myself and the support staff who made remote life here possible, like Henry and Dr. Bobert. I reached the comms booth and saw Rachel sitting at the display with her headset on. She shot me a grin and pulled off her headset. "Hey, James," she said. "How about you and Henry last night, huh?" I shrugged. "I know, I shouldn't antagonize him. He's just trying to give us all a little entertainment." "You're right," she said. "I'm sure it's fine. Henry's not the type to hold a grudge anyway." She reached out and squeezed my hand. I gave a small smile and sat down next to her, scratching her back absent-mindedly. "It's just, living with the same 30 people for months can get a little crazy, you know?" I said. Rachel raised an eyebrow and looked me up and down. "Oh, I know." I gave a laugh. "Okay, I probably deserve that one. Rachel 1, James 0. She laughed and leaned against me. "I'm pretty sure it's actually Rachel 39, James 0. Before I could respond, the radio blared in her headset, loud enough for us both to hear. The voice of a young man was audible from where I sat. "Scott Station, do you copy?" Rachel immediately picked up the headset and hit the microphone. "We copy. Please identify." "This is Ambolt Station, Marius Olson speaking. I'm the junior communications officer. Please, we need help. After your man left last night, Jenkins got loose again, and he started attacking everyone. And it's not just him. 4 more people have started acting crazy." There was desperation in his voice. Rachel flipped open a map of Antarctica looking for Ambolt Station, then hit the microphone again. "We copy you, Marius. How many people live at Ambolt Station during the winter?" There was no response on the radio. A long minute passed, but a voice finally responded. "I heard someone in the hallway. They tried the door. We only have 12 people living here. Please hurry." A loud cracking noise sounded out through the comms. "Helvete, they know I'm in here. Please." The line went dead. Rachel looked at me, wide-eyed. "Let's call everyone together," I said. We all grouped together in the living room of the station to discuss what happened. Most people thought that Jenkins was just having a psychotic break, but no one knew for sure. The only thing people could agree on was that someone had to go check. Henry raised a hand. "I'm the only one who's already done that trip, so I'm going. Besides, I've had enough of my teeth kicked in that I'm nearly used to it." He grinned, showing his missing tooth. I stood in the doorway, just listening to the discussion. "I'll go with you," I said. "Rachel can monitor my telescope, and it's not like I'm doing much here anyway." I shot a grin at Henry. "Besides, I need to be there to make sure you don't make up anything else." Henry gave a laugh. "All right, James, you got a deal. I won't be making up anything this time." Henry and I spent the rest of that evening getting our 2 snowmobiles ready. We loaded up extra fuel and satellite phones, just in case we ran into trouble, and we planned out our trip for the next day. When all that was finally done, I fell into bed, feeling exhausted. I didn't sleep well that night. Marius had said that another 4 people had gone crazy with Jenkins. Why would 5 people just snap like that? It didn't make sense. Sunday, July 9th, 2017. Ambolt Station was something like 40 miles away, a journey that would take us a few hours on our snowmobiles. We left early in the morning, though you wouldn't have known it from the pitch darkness that always covered the landscape in winter. Still, the lights on our machines were powerful, and we made good time, cutting around the obstacles between us and Ambolt Station. The weather was bitterly cold, even through my specially designed gear. It doesn't much matter what you wear when you're riding in temperatures that would kill you in minutes. Life in Antarctica is strange. I felt like I could be 1,000 years in the past, or on another planet. And I still wouldn't feel further from home than I felt at that moment. After an hour or 2 of riding, Henry signaled for us to stop. I pulled my machine to a stop next to his. And flipped it off. He reached back into his bag and pulled out a water bottle. "How much further do we have?" I asked. He looked at me coldly. "I don't know. You think you're going to believe me if I tell you?" A moment passed in silence. I scratched my head. I didn't mean to. I trailed off. Henry said. He finished his water and stuffed it back into his bag. Then he flipped his machine back on and set off again without another word. I sat in silence for a moment, trying to process what happened. Henry wasn't slowing down, so I turned my machine over and started after him. Another 2 hours passed with nothing but the drone of snowmobile engines. When the bright lights of Ambled Station finally appeared on the horizon, I breathed a sigh of relief. That relief quickly turned to dread when I realized that the lights that I'd seen weren't coming from bulbs. The lights were from fires. Ambled Station burned, the yellow flames licking up the sides of the structures. Henry and I stopped our machines just outside the compound and walked up to the site. Some structures had already burned themselves out. Only the furthest buildings from the center still remained ablaze. We walked to the center of the camp and saw what remained of their fuel tanks. They were a heap of twisted and blackened metal. Henry knelt down next to them. "This tank was blown up," he said, as if to himself. He didn't even look at me. "But why would anyone blow up their own fuel tank?" I asked. Henry stood up without responding and walked into the main building. I followed him closely. Bodies littered the floor, some more burned than others. One relatively unburnt body lay in the hallway, and I noticed something sticking out of its chest. I knelt down and felt it, only to realize that it was an axe handle. "Henry," I said, "you'll want to take a look at this." Henry came over and stared down at the body. Almost all at once, I felt nauseous and lightheaded. I moved away from the body, hot bile rising in the back of my throat. I leaned against a wall and closed my eyes, forcing myself not to be sick. That's when I heard a strange crunching noise coming from the body behind me. "Hey, James," Henry said. "What am I lying about this time?" I turned around. Henry held the fire axe in his hand. Blood dripped from his eyes, ears, and nose. His eyes were unfocused, yet angry. He looked at me with a fury that I can't even describe. Then he ran at me, swinging the axe and shouting, "Am I lying about this?" I ducked, and the axe sunk into the wall next to where my head had been. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing. Henry was almost twice my size, so there was no way I was taking him in a fight. On top of that, he had an axe. Henry tugged at it from where it was stuck in the wall, the blood falling from his face like thick droplets of rain. I took advantage of his distraction to turn and run, praying to come across a door to the outside. I knew it wasn't likely. Doors in these stations were expensive, closer to airlocks than anything else. As I ducked into a side room, I heard the splinter of wood as the axe ripped free from the wall. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hall towards the room where I stood. I looked around desperately and saw that the flames had eaten away one of the side walls. I took one last look towards the hallway, then ran at the wall with my shoulder. The wood had been weakened by the fire and splintered and shattered under my weight. I crashed through, hitting the ground below hard. The deep snow cushioned my impact, turning a fall that should have broken my arms and ribs into one that just knocked the air out of me. I struggled to my feet, but my winter gear was heavy and bulky. I had only made it a few dozen feet when I heard Henry hit the ground behind me. "You know you shouldn't lie, James," he called out. I ran without looking back, finally reaching my snowmobile. I jumped onto it and turned over the engine. Henry was a dozen feet from me, with the axe in his hands, swinging it wildly. I gunned the engine and hit him square in the chest. It made a terrible, crunching noise with the impact, and he spun like a ragdoll into the snow. I turned my machine back towards the South Pole station and hit the gas. A few hundred feet later, I slowed down and looked over my shoulder. The night was dark, but I could barely make out Henry's body with the light of the burning station. He wasn't moving. I glanced at the clock on my snowmobile and saw that it was just past midnight. I leaned over the side of my snowmobile and vomited. I cleaned my mouth with the back of my hand, then turned my attention back to my driving, setting off towards home. Monday, July 10th, 2017. I called everyone together and told them what we'd found, and then what had happened. After I finished my story, Dr. Bobert stepped forward. "Well, it sounds like this man Jenkins caught some disease," he said. "It's not a disease I've ever heard of, but it's the only thing that fits." He looked around at us. 29 people stood in the room, faces somber. "This disease sounds very communicable," he said. "I'm no epidemiologist, but I think we should quarantine ourselves. Even standing in this room together could be dangerous." Everyone nodded. Dr. Bobert looked at me. "And, those who had closest contact with Henry should be kept behind locked doors, I think." I felt a chill run through me. Was I sick with whatever this thing was? Henry had gone from normal to homicidal in just a few hours. I looked at Dr. Bobert and nodded. "Of course, that makes sense," I said. The 8 of us who were with Henry the night he told his story moved to our individual rooms. I caught Rachel's eye as she walked into her room and held it for a long moment. She gave me a sad smile and shut her door. I did the same. I heard the sound of motion in the hallway as the others put drop bars or furniture in front of our doors to block us in. Dr. Bobert spoke through his door in the room next to mine. "Henry exhibited symptoms after just 2 days, so hopefully we shouldn't have to do this for long. Just try to relax for now, and if you feel anything strange, just let everyone know." The rest of the day passed in excruciating boredom. I spent most of my time doodling in my notebook. It seems that I put my hand to my nose every other minute to see if I was bleeding, but thankfully nothing appeared, and I didn't feel strange at all. Long after the hall lights had been turned off, I fell into an uneasy sleep. Tuesday, July 11th, 2017. I awoke to the sound of a loud bang from somewhere inside our building. I pounded on my door and demanded to be let out, but heard no response. Then I stopped and listened hard. There was a soft moaning sound coming from outside. I unlocked my door and kicked at it. Each blow forced it open another inch or two. I finally began ramming my shoulder into it and knocked over the dresser that had been put in front of my way. A man lay at my feet. His chest was wet with what looked like stab wounds. He moaned again, and I backed away from him, trying not to vomit. Several rooms were open along the hallway, rooms where sick people had been staying. I saw Rachel's door was still locked shut and felt a wave of relief wash over me. I walked up to it and knocked. I ran up to it and pounded on it. I ran up to the door and pounded. "Rachel, you okay in there?" I asked. "James? Yeah, I'm fine," she said. I pulled away the desk in front of her door and opened it. "We have to get out of here," I said. Rachel saw the body in the hallway and brought her hand to her mouth. Then she blinked and nodded. "Okay, where do we go?" she asked. My mind raced. "We don't know how many got sick, but I say we grab a snowmobile and head for Edmond Station. It's far, but if we bring extra gas, we should be able to make it." Rachel nodded. We started down the hallway, passing scene after scene of carnage. Some of the bodies had blood leaking from their eyes, but most didn't. We reached the garage of the station, and I looked through the window on the door. Dr. Bobert was hacking away at the last remaining snowmobile with a crowbar. Its gas tank was already torn away on the ground. He stopped occasionally to wipe away the blood that dripped from his chin. I pulled Rachel away from the door, and we walked back. The sounds of several pairs of footsteps echoed down the hall in front of us. So we ducked into the kitchen. I looked around and saw the huge walk-in freezer that held most of our supplies. I pulled Rachel into it and shut the door behind us. I turned towards the freezer door, preparing for a fight, for anything. when it opened. Dr. Bobert stood in the kitchen, surrounded by 6 other people, each dripping blood. All were armed with some sort of weapon. Axes, knives. I even saw one holding a club made from a table leg. They stared at us, smiling. Rachel yelled, "Why are you doing this?" Dr. Bobert didn't respond. He just grimaced and rubbed away the blood dripping from his chin. Then he smiled and did the one thing I hadn't prepared myself for. He slammed the freezer door shut. I heard the sound of the lock turning from the outside. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I ran at the door, but it was no use. The freezer was made out of stainless steel, and the door was inches thick, composed of insulation and metal. Rachel and I looked at each other. We were both wearing t-shirts and jeans. I felt tears well up. "Rachel, I'm sorry," I said. I felt my pockets for tools, for anything, but all I had was my notebook from my room and a pen. I looked up at Rachel in disbelief. She walked up to me and buried her face in my chest, her tears soaking into my shirt. We collapsed to the ground. I've spent the past few hours writing out these entries, but I can't feel my fingers too well anymore. They say that freezing isn't too bad, as far as ways to die go. I'm so sorry. I hope you all enjoyed this story. If you've listened all the way to the end, please let me know by leaving a like on the video. Also, comment below what you thought of the story. Your comments are what help motivate me to keep writing and narrating on this channel. And as for the special announcement I talked about at the beginning, I wanted to let you all know that I'm working on a full-length novel. I'm something like 30,000 words into it, and it's something I'm very proud of so far. Its tone is fairly different from this channel, but here's a brief hook. It's about 2 17-year-old students who live on a remote mining colony. Both of them dream of joining the Pathfinder organization. The Pathfinders are a prestigious group responsible for finding new moons and asteroids and preparing them for colonization. Drake Hamilton is a poor miner's son, and he dreams of joining the Pathfinders for adventure and the chance to see new worlds. Olivia Montgomery is the daughter of the mining station's governor. She wants to join them both to win honor and to please her father. They'll have to go through struggles that will take both to Earth and to greater danger than either realize. Anyways, I'm really excited about it, and I hope you are too. My goal is to get it traditionally published, and I'll be sure to let you all know here if or when that happens. Thanks again for all your support. Oh, also, as most of you know, I personally write every story that goes on this channel. I'm thinking of combining some of my favorite stories that I've narrated here, together with some new ones, into a horror story anthology book on Kindle. Would any of you have any interest in that? Leave a comment below if so. Thank you guys so much for watching, I really appreciate it. And as always, I hope you've enjoyed your time on Worchester Street.